It is the morning of March 15th, 44 BC, the Ides of March. A 55-year-old man wakes in his home near the Forum in Rome. His name is Gaius Julius Caesar, and he is the most powerful man in the world. He has conquered Gaul, modern France, Belgium, and parts of Germany and Switzerland. He has crossed the Rubicon and defeated his rivals in civil war. He controls the Roman legions, the treasury, and the fate of millions. The Senate has granted him unprecedented powers. Some whisper he plans to make himself king. But this morning, Caesar hesitates. His wife Calpurnia has had nightmares. She dreamed she held his bleeding corpse. The soothsayers have warned him. Beware the Ides of March. His friends urge him not to go to the Senate meeting today. He dismisses their fears. Cowards die many times before their deaths. He will later be quoted as saying, "The valiant never taste of death but once." He walks toward the theater of Pompey, where the Senate is meeting. As he enters, a senator named Julius Caesar approaches, pretending to petition for his brother's pardon. Others crowd close. Too close. Caesar suddenly grabs Caesar's toga, yanking it from his shoulder. The signal, steel flashes. A dagger strikes his body. Then another, and another. "Et tu, Brute," Caesar gasps, seeing his protege Marcus Brutus among the assassins. "You too, Brutus." 23 stab wounds. The conqueror of Gaul, the master of Rome, collapses at the base of Pompey's statue, drowning in his own blood. The conspirators thought they were saving the Republic. They thought killing Caesar would restore Roman liberty. They were catastrophically wrong. Caesar's assassination didn't save the Republic. It destroyed it. Within 15 years, Caesar's adopted heir Octavian would become Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. The Republic would die, and an empire would rise from Caesar's blood. Tonight we explore the life and death of Julius Caesar, a man born into a declining aristocratic family who transformed himself into a god, a brilliant general who conquered nations, a shrewd politician who bent Rome to his will, a writer whose words survive today, and a dictator whose murder became history's most famous assassination. Was Caesar a tyrant who deserved to die, or a visionary killed by jealous mediocrities? Was his assassination tyrannicide or treason? Did the conspirators save the Republic or murder it? These questions haunted Rome. They haunt us still. Before we begin, a quick note. Playing ads is what lets us keep bringing you new bedtime biographies every week. But we know you're here to relax, so we've limited them to the first 20 minutes. After that, the rest of the story flows uninterrupted. And if you enjoy our work, a like and subscribe helps other restless minds find these stories. This is the story of ambition without limit, of genius without mercy, of power that corrupted the powerful and the powerless alike. This is the tragic fall of Julius Caesar and the fall of the Republic he destroyed even as he claimed to defend it. Gaius Julius Caesar was born in July 100 BC into one of Rome's oldest patrician families, the gens Julia. The Julii claimed descent from Iulus, son of the Trojan hero Aeneas, who was himself the son of the goddess Venus. So Caesar believed, quite literally, that he was descended from gods. This wasn't unusual arrogance. Many Roman noble families claimed divine ancestry, but Caesar took it more seriously than most. Despite their ancient lineage, the Julii weren't particularly wealthy or politically dominant by Caesar's time. They were respectable, but not among the handful of families who controlled Roman politics. Rome in 100 BC was a republic, but a republic dominated by a senatorial aristocracy. perhaps 300 families who monopolized the consulships and other high offices. Caesar grew up in the Suburra, a crowded working-class neighborhood in Rome. Not because his family was poor, but because that's where their ancestral home happened to be. He grew up hearing the noise of the streets, smelling the bakeries and brothels, seeing the urban poor who would later form his political base. His childhood was dominated by political violence. Rome, in the late 2nd and early 1st centuries BC, was tearing itself apart. The Republic's traditional institutions couldn't handle the stresses of governing a vast empire. Two factions emerged: the Optimates, traditionalists who supported senatorial power, and the Populares, reformers who appealed to the people's assemblies. The conflict turned bloody. In 88 BC, when Caesar was 12, the general Sulla marched his legions on Rome, the first time a Roman general had attacked his own city. Sulla was an Optimate, fighting against the Populares leader Marius. Thousands died in the ensuing civil war. Marius took control, purged his enemies, then died. Sulla returned in 82 BC with his legions and launched the proscriptions, state-sponsored murder of political enemies. Lists of names were posted in the forum. Anyone on the list could be killed legally, and the killer would receive a reward. Perhaps 5,000 Romans were murdered. This mattered to Caesar personally. His uncle by marriage was Marius, the great general and Popularis leader. Caesar himself had married Cornelia, daughter of Cinna, another Popularis leader. Sulla ordered Caesar to divorce her. Caesar refused. An act of remarkable courage, or foolishness, for an 18-year-old facing the dictator who had just murdered thousands. Sulla confiscated Caesar's inheritance and Cornelia's dowry. Caesar was marked for death. Friends interceded, and Sulla reluctantly pardoned him. But Sulla reportedly said, "Have your way and take him. Only bear in mind that the man you are so eager to save will one day deal the death blow to the cause of the aristocracy." In this Caesar, there are many Mariuses. Sulla was right. Caesar left Rome. It wasn't safe. He served in the army in Asia Minor, modern Turkey, earning the civic crown, Rome's second highest military honor, for saving a fellow soldier's life during the siege of Mytilene in 81 BC. He was only 19, but military service wasn't his calling, not yet. When Sulla died in 78 BC, Caesar returned to Rome and became a lawyer. He was a brilliant orator, second only to Cicero in reputation. He prosecuted corrupt provincial governors, winning fame for eloquence and nerve. Roman court cases were public spectacles, and Caesar learned to command an audience. But he was still poor relative to Rome's elite. In 75 BC, traveling to Rhodes to study rhetoric, he was captured by pirates. They demanded 20 talents ransom. Caesar laughed and told them he was worth at least 50 talents. While waiting for the ransom, he treated the pirates like servants, ordering them around, reading them his poetry, and calling them illiterate savages when they didn't appreciate it. He joked that he would crucify them all once he was free. He wasn't joking. Once ransomed, Caesar raised a naval force, hunted down the pirates, captured them, and had them crucified, though he mercifully slit their throats first to speed their deaths. He was 25 years old and already demonstrating the combination of charm, ruthlessness, and follow-through that would define his career. Roman political careers followed the cursus honorum, the course of honors, a ladder of offices that ambitious men climbed. But success required three things: family connections, military glory, and money. Caesar had the first. would earn the second, but desperately needed the third. So he went into debt, massive, terrifying debt. He borrowed from Rome's richest men, particularly Marcus Licinius Crassus, a real estate speculator who had made a fortune from Sulla's proscriptions by buying condemned men's property at fire sale prices. Crassus was Rome's richest man and would become Caesar's crucial patron. With borrowed money, Caesar began climbing. He became military tribune, then quaestor, junior magistrate, serving in Spain in 69 BC. The story goes that in Spain, seeing a statue of Alexander the Great, Caesar wept. Asked why, he said, "Do you think I have not just cause to weep? When I consider that Alexander at my age had conquered so many nations, and I have all this time done nothing that is memorable." He was 30. He returned to Rome and became aedile, the magistrate responsible for public works and games. Caesar borrowed even more money and put on spectacularly expensive gladiatorial games and theatrical productions. He went bankrupt, but he won popularity. The Roman people loved him. The Senate was worried. Personal tragedy struck in 69 BC. His wife Cornelia died. Caesar gave a public funeral oration, unusual for a young woman, praising her virtue. His aunt Julia, Marius's widow, also died, and Caesar gave a funeral oration displaying images of Marius, illegal under Sulla's laws. But Sulla was dead, and Caesar was testing boundaries. The people cheered. The optimates fumed. In 63 BC, Caesar was elected Pontifex Maximus, chief priest of Rome, a position that gave him enormous prestige and a lifetime official residence. He defeated two much older, more experienced candidates, mainly by bribing electors with borrowed money. His debts now reached astronomical levels. Crassus and others had to bail him out. Caesar owed everyone, which meant everyone had a stake in his success. He became praetor in 62 BC, then propraetor of further Spain, 60 BC. In Spain, he finally showed his military genius. He led campaigns against rebellious tribes, displaying courage, tactical brilliance, and the ability to inspire his soldiers. He marched his army to the Atlantic Ocean, the edge of the known world. His soldiers declared him imperator, victorious general, giving him the right to a triumphal parade in Rome. But when he returned to Rome in 60 BC, Caesar faced a choice. To celebrate a triumph, he had to remain outside the city. Generals weren't allowed to enter Rome with their armies. But to run for consul, the highest office, he had to enter the city and campaign. He asked the Senate to let him run in absentia. The Senate, led by his enemy Cato the Younger, refused. Caesar gave up the triumph and entered Rome to run for consul. He would never forget the insult. Cato would eventually pay for it with his life. Caesar won the consulship for 59 BC, but he was just one of two consuls. His colleague was Marcus Calpurnius Bibulus, an optimate conservative, who would oppose everything Caesar attempted. Caesar needed more power, so he engineered a secret political alliance, the First Triumvirate. 3 men agreed to cooperate: Caesar Crassus, the richest man in Rome, and Gnaeus Pompey Magnus, Rome's greatest living general. Each had what the others needed. Crassus had money, Pompey had military prestige and veteran soldiers. Caesar had political skill and popularity. It was technically legal but fundamentally corrupt. 3 private citizens were coordinating to control the Republic. They bypassed the Senate, used their combined resources to dominate elections and legislation, and essentially ruled Rome as a board of directors. The Republic's institutions were becoming a facade. As consul in 59 BC, Caesar was ruthless. He proposed popular legislation, land redistribution for Pompey's veterans, ratification of Pompey's eastern settlements, and when the Senate opposed him, he took the proposals directly to the people's assemblies. When his co-consul Bibulus tried to obstruct him using religious pretexts, Caesar had him physically removed from the forum. Bibulus spent the rest of the year locked in his house, issuing futile proclamations. Romans joked that the year's consuls weren't Caesar and Bibulus, but Julius and Caesar. Caesar also married his daughter Julia to Pompey, cementing their alliance with a family bond. And he married Calpurnia, daughter of a wealthy senator, securing another political connection. But consulship was only a one-year term. Afterward, Caesar needed a provincial governorship. Both for money, governors could legally plunder their provinces, and for military glory, to rival Pompey. His enemies tried to give him minimal provinces, forests and sheep paths in Italy. Instead, through his allies, Caesar secured Cisalpine Gaul, northern Italy, Illyricum, the Adriatic coast, and Transalpine Gaul, southern France. He got command of 4 legions. His governorship was for 5 years, later extended to 10. Caesar left Rome in 58 BC. He would not return for 9 years, and in that time, he would transform from a politician into a conqueror. Gaul in 58 BC was not a unified nation but a patchwork of Celtic tribes, Helvetii, Aedui, Arverni, Belgae, and many others. They were sophisticated societies with their own coinage, writing, limited, art, and warrior culture. But they were disunited, often fighting each other. Rome had already conquered southern Gaul, the province, modern Provence. Caesar's commission was to defend Roman territory, but Caesar didn't want defense. He wanted conquest. He needed military glory to compete with Pompey, and he needed wealth to pay his debts. The Helvetii, a tribe from modern Switzerland, decided to migrate westward across Gaul. Their route crossed Roman territory. Caesar used this as a pretext. In rapid marches, he intercepted them, fought them, and drove them back. He had just defeated a major tribe, but he wasn't finished. German tribes led by Ariovistus had crossed the Rhine and were settling in Gaul. Gallic tribes asked Rome for help. Caesar marched against Ariovistus, despite his soldiers' fear of the legendary German warriors. Before the battle, Caesar gave a speech so stirring that his terrified soldiers transformed into eager warriors. He defeated Ariovistus decisively, driving the Germans back across the Rhine. In 1 year, 58 BC, Caesar had defeated 2 major enemies. He wrote detailed dispatches back to Rome, describing his victories. These dispatches, written in third person, as Caesar did this, Caesar did that, were posted publicly in Rome, shaping his image as a brilliant general. These would eventually become his famous commentaries on the Gallic War, one of history's great military memoirs. In 57 BC, Caesar turned north against the Belgae, tribes known as the fiercest warriors in Gaul. The Belgae Confederacy raised perhaps 300,000 warriors. Caesar had about 50,000 soldiers. On paper, he was vastly outnumbered. In reality, Roman discipline and tactics were superior. Caesar won battle after battle, conquering tribe after tribe. His methods were brutal. When tribes resisted, he massacred populations, sold entire peoples into slavery, and destroyed villages. The Atuatuci tribe surrendered, and Caesar sold all 53,000 survivors into slavery, men, women, children, enriching himself and his soldiers. When the Veneti tribe rebelled in 56 BC, Caesar captured their leaders and executed them, then sold the entire population into slavery. His campaigns were conquest wrapped in genocide. But they were also brilliant. Caesar's soldiers loved him. He shared their hardships, marched with them, fought in the front lines. He learned their names, rewarded bravery lavishly, and forgave them for almost any misconduct in battle. He paid them well from plundered gold. They would follow him anywhere. In 55 BC, Caesar did something unprecedented. He built a bridge across the Rhine, a massive engineering feat, marched his legions into Germany, spent 18 days demonstrating Roman power, then marched back and tore down the bridge. The message was clear: Rome could reach anywhere. Then he invaded Britain. 2 expeditions, 55 and 54 BC, crossed the English Channel, the first Roman armies ever to reach Britain. The invasions accomplished little militarily but were propaganda triumphs. Caesar had reached the edge of the known world. In Rome, the Senate voted 15 days of public thanksgiving, unprecedented honors. But Caesar's command was built on war. If the war ended, he would have to return to Rome, give up his army, and face his enemies in the Senate, particularly Cato, who wanted to prosecute him for illegal acts during his consulship. So Caesar kept finding reasons to fight. In 54 BC, Caesar's world cracked. His daughter Julia, wife of Pompey, died in childbirth. The baby died too. This was both personal tragedy and political disaster. Julia was the bond holding Caesar and Pompey together. With her death, the alliance began to fray. Then, in 53 BC, Crassus, the third triumvir, died disastrously. He had launched an invasion of Parthia, roughly modern Iraq and Iran, seeking military glory to match Caesar and Pompey. At the Battle of Carrhae, the Parthians annihilated his army. Crassus was killed, reportedly with molten gold poured down his throat to mock his greed. His death left just Caesar and Pompey. 2 sons couldn't share the same sky. Meanwhile, in Gaul, the tribes were approaching exhaustion. Caesar had killed perhaps 1 million people and enslaved 1 million more. Gaul was traumatized, but it wasn't broken. In 52 BC, a young Gallic chieftain named Vercingetorix united the tribes in a massive revolt. Vercingetorix was brilliant. He understood he couldn't beat Rome in open battle. So he used scorched earth tactics, destroying food supplies and raiding Roman columns. For the first time, Caesar was in real danger. The campaign focused on the siege of Alesia, where Vercingetorix and 80,000 warriors took refuge. Caesar besieged the town, building 11 miles of fortifications around it. Then a Gallic relief army of perhaps 250,000 warriors arrived to rescue Vercingetorix. Caesar was trapped between 2 armies, besieging Alesia, while being besieged himself. So he built a second wall, facing outward, creating concentric fortifications. Now he was simultaneously besieging and being besieged. It was military insanity. And it worked. After desperate fighting, Caesar defeated the relief army. Vercingetorix, starving and defeated, surrendered himself to save his people. Caesar kept Vercingetorix alive, imprisoned for 6 years, to display in his eventual triumph. The proud Gallic chief would be paraded through Rome in chains, then ritually strangled in a prison cell. It was Roman tradition. It was also Roman cruelty. By 50 BC, Gaul was conquered. 8 years of war, over 300 battles and sieges, an estimated 1 million dead, 1 million enslaved, an entire civilization subjugated. Caesar had added territory the size of France, Belgium, and parts of Germany and Switzerland to Rome's empire. He had made himself fabulously wealthy. He had created a battle-hardened army of veteran legions fanatically loyal to him personally. He was Rome's greatest general since Scipio Africanus. He had conquered as much as Pompey. His military reputation rivaled Alexander the Great's, and he was ready to return home. But Rome wouldn't be ready for him. By 50 BC, Caesar's position was impossible. He had conquered Gaul and made himself the most popular general in Rome. But his enemies in the Senate, led by Cato the Younger and increasingly supported by Pompey, were determined to destroy him politically the moment he gave up his army. Roman law was clear. A general could not bring his army into Italy proper. The boundary was the Rubicon River in northern Italy. Cross it with armed men, and you committed treason. But if Caesar disbanded his army before entering Rome, he would be a private citizen, vulnerable to prosecution. His enemies had prepared multiple charges: illegally starting wars, exceeding his authority, misusing public funds. If convicted, he faced exile or death. Caesar offered compromises. He proposed that he and Pompey both give up their commands simultaneously. Pompey controlled Spain through legates and had legions near Rome. Caesar pointed out the double standard. Why should he disarm while Pompey remained armed? The Senate, dominated by Optimates who hated Caesar, refused all compromises. On January 1st, 49 BC, the consul Lentulus read a letter from Caesar to the Senate. Caesar offered to give up all but 2 legions in the provinces of Cisalpine Gaul and Illyricum, a massive concession. The tribunes Mark Antony and Quintus Cassius, Caesar's allies, proposed the vote. The Senate was about to accept when Cato and the Optimates blocked it. They demanded total capitulation. Caesar must give up everything. The tribunes vetoed the Senate's ultimatum, their constitutional right. The Senate passed the Senatus Consultum Ultimum, the ultimate decree, essentially martial law, commanding the consuls to see that the Republic takes no harm. It was a declaration that Caesar was an enemy of the state. The Senate ordered Pompey to defend Rome. Antony and Cassius fled Rome in disguise, fearing for their lives. They reached Caesar at Ravenna in northern Italy. Caesar faced the choice that would define his life and Rome's future: obey the Senate, return to Rome alone, face trial, and probably die, politically, if not physically, or defy the Senate, march on Rome with his army, and start a civil war. On January 10th, 49 BC, at nightfall, Caesar approached the Rubicon River with a single legion, the 13th. He hesitated at the riverbank. Suetonius, writing over a century later, claims he said, "Alea iacta est," the die is cast. Plutarch reports he quoted Greek, "Let the die be cast." He crossed. It was treason. It was revolution. It was the moment the Republic began to die. Caesar's crossing of the Rubicon shocked Rome. He had only 1 legion, perhaps 5,000 soldiers, but he moved with terrifying speed. Town after town opened its gates to him. By the time the Senate realized what was happening, Caesar was marching down the Italian peninsula. Pompey and the Senate panicked. They had legions in Spain, but those legions weren't in Italy. Pompey's forces near Rome were recently recruited and untrained. Pompey made a fateful decision: abandon Italy, retreat to Greece, gather his forces, and return to crush Caesar. The evacuation was chaotic. Senators, magistrates, and Pompey's soldiers fled to the port of Brundisium. On March 17th, 49 BC, Pompey and the remaining senators sailed for Greece. Caesar pursued but couldn't prevent the escape. The Senate, the legitimate government of Rome, was now in exile. Caesar controlled Italy, but his enemies controlled the legitimacy. Caesar returned to Rome. The city was nearly empty. Most senators had fled. Caesar broke into the treasury. The guards ran away and took the gold to pay his soldiers. He held elections with few voters and had himself appointed consul. He claimed to be defending the Republic against a senatorial faction that had illegally driven tribunes from Rome. It was propaganda, but effective propaganda. But Caesar couldn't relax. Pompey had 7 legions in Spain. Caesar marched there, defeated Pompey's lieutenants at Ilerda in August 49 BC, and secured Spain. "I have defeated an army without a general," he said. "Now I go to fight a general without an army," meaning Pompey in Greece. He returned to Italy, crossed the Adriatic in winter, risking storms, and landed in Greece with 7 legions in January 48 BC. Pompey had 9 legions and controlled the sea. The campaign would decide the war. For months the armies maneuvered. At Dyrrhachium, Pompey defeated Caesar in a battle, Caesar's first major defeat. Caesar's army was shaken, but Pompey didn't pursue aggressively. Caesar's soldiers, bloodied but still loyal, regrouped. On August 9th, 48 BC, at Pharsalus in central Greece, the two armies finally met in open battle. Pompey had 45,000 infantry and 7,000 cavalry. Caesar had 22,000 infantry and 1,000 cavalry. Pompey should have won. But Caesar was a better general. He hit a 4th line of infantry behind his cavalry, surprising Pompey's cavalry charge. When Pompey's cavalry fled, Caesar's 4th line wheeled and attacked Pompey's exposed flank. Pompey's army broke. Perhaps 15,000 of Pompey's soldiers died. 24,000 surrendered. Caesar lost perhaps 200 men. Pompey fled the battlefield. He sailed to Egypt, hoping the young pharaoh Ptolemy III would give him sanctuary. Pompey had helped Ptolemy's father years before, but Ptolemy's advisors decided that dead friends are safer than live ones. As Pompey's boat reached shore near Alexandria on September 28th, 48 BC, Ptolemy's men stabbed him to death. They cut off his head and preserved it to present to Caesar as a gift. Caesar arrived in Egypt 3 days later. When Ptolemy's men presented Pompey's head and signet ring, Caesar wept. He had lost a friend, an ally turned enemy, and the man who had once been the Republic's greatest defender. He had Pompey's murderers executed, not for killing Pompey, but for murdering a Roman consul without trial. The civil war's first phase was over. Caesar had won, but the cost was enormous. Romans had killed Romans. The Republic's unity was shattered, and Caesar had become something unprecedented, a Roman who had defeated Rome itself. Caesar arrived in Egypt with only 4,000 soldiers. Egypt was nominally independent but effectively a Roman client state. It was also in the middle of a civil war. The pharaoh Ptolemy III, age 13, and his sister wife Cleopatra VII, age 21, were fighting for control. Cleopatra had been driven from Alexandria by her brother's advisors. Caesar, as Rome's representative, offered to mediate. But Ptolemy's advisors, particularly the eunuch Pothinus, saw Caesar as a threat. They had just murdered Pompey. Perhaps they'd murder Caesar too. Cleopatra made a legendary move. She needed to meet Caesar secretly, so she had herself rolled up in a carpet, or bedding, sources vary, and smuggled into Caesar's quarters. The carpet was unrolled. and outstepped the young queen. It was dramatic, clever, and effective. Caesar was captivated. Cleopatra was intelligent, educated. She spoke 9 languages, and politically brilliant. She was also beautiful according to ancient sources, though her coins suggest she had a large nose and strong features. Perhaps not conventionally pretty, but undeniably striking. She needed Caesar's support to regain her throne. Caesar needed Egypt's wealth and grain, and at 52 years old, the conqueror of Gaul was smitten by the 21-year-old queen. Ptolemy's advisors were furious. They besieged Caesar and Cleopatra in the palace complex. The Alexandrian War, 48-47 BC, was fought in the streets and harbors of Alexandria. At one point, Caesar had to swim for his life, holding documents above water with one hand. The famous Library of Alexandria partially burned during the fighting, an accidental destruction that lost thousands of manuscripts. Caesar's reinforcements arrived. Legions from Syria and Pontus. In March 47 BC, at the Battle of the Nile, Caesar defeated Ptolemy's army. Ptolemy III drowned in the Nile, weighed down by his golden armor. Caesar installed Cleopatra as queen, co-ruling with her younger brother Ptolemy XIV, whom she would eventually have murdered. Cleopatra was pregnant with Caesar's child, Caesarion, Little Caesar, born in June 47 BC. Caesar stayed in Egypt 3 months, an extraordinarily long time for someone supposedly hurrying to consolidate power. He and Cleopatra allegedly sailed up the Nile on a luxurious barge, a floating palace. Whether this romantic cruise actually happened is debated, but it makes a good story. What's certain is that Caesar was falling for Cleopatra, or at least for what she offered: wealth, alliance, and exotic glamour. But duty called. Pharnaces II, king of Pontus, in modern Turkey, had invaded Roman territory. Caesar marched against him. At Zela on August 2nd, 47 BC, Caesar won so decisively and quickly that he sent his famous 3-word dispatch to Rome. Veni, vidi, vici. I came, I saw, I conquered. It was his greatest one-liner. Caesar returned to Rome in September 47 BC. He had been away from Rome for 3 years, fighting civil war in Greece, romantic entanglements in Egypt, and mopping up campaigns in Asia Minor. He had won every battle. He controlled the Roman world, but his enemies weren't all dead. When Caesar returned to Italy in 47 BC, he found chaos. In his absence, his subordinates had misruled. His master of horse, second in command, Mark Antony, had governed Italy poorly, enriching himself and his friends. Soldiers were mutinying, demanding pay and discharge. The economy was struggling. And worst of all, the Optimates, the senators who had fled with Pompey, had regrouped in North Africa and were raising new armies. Caesar dealt with the mutiny personally. The 10th Legion, his favorite veterans of Gaul, refused orders and demanded discharge. They'd fought for him for 10 years. They wanted retirement bonuses and land. Caesar appeared before them and addressed them as citizens, not soldiers, implying they were already discharged. The shock silenced them. They begged to be reinstated as soldiers. Caesar, after letting them squirm, accepted them back. It was psychological mastery. But he had to deal with Africa. Cato the Younger, Metellus Scipio, and other Optimates had allied with King Juba of Numidia, modern Algeria, Tunisia, and raised 14 legions. They were Caesar's last major enemies. Caesar landed in Africa in December 47 BC with 6 legions. The campaign was difficult. North African terrain was harsh. Supplies were scarce. and the enemy was numerous. At Thapsus on April 6th, 46 BC, Caesar won a crushing victory. Thousands of optimates died, thousands more surrendered. Cato the Younger refused to surrender. He retreated to Utica, ensured his friends and family escaped, read Plato's Phaedo about Socrates' death and the immortality of the soul, then stabbed himself with his sword. When doctors tried to save him, he tore out his own intestines. It was an agonizing, defiant suicide, dying free rather than submitting to Caesar's clemency. Cato became a martyr to the dying republic. Caesar reportedly said when he heard of Cato's death, "Cato, I begrudge you your death, as you have begrudged me the chance to spare you." It's a revealing statement. Caesar wanted to show mercy, to demonstrate his clemency. But Cato denied him that. By dying, Cato won a moral victory. He couldn't beat Caesar militarily, but he could deny him the glory of forgiveness. Caesar returned to Rome and celebrated 4 triumphs for Gaul, Egypt, Pontus, and Africa on consecutive days in September 46 BC. It was unprecedented. Vercingetorix was finally paraded through Rome in chains, then strangled in prison, 6 years after his surrender. The triumphs displayed unimaginable wealth: gold, silver, exotic animals, captured kings and generals, paintings of battles, and Caesar's soldiers singing bawdy songs, mocking their general, a traditional privilege during the triumphs. But Caesar couldn't rest. Pompey's sons, Gnaeus and Sextus Pompey, had raised another army in Spain. In November 46 BC, exhausted and aging, he was 54. Caesar marched to Spain for one last campaign. At Munda on March 17th, 45 BC, Caesar faced the bloodiest battle of the civil wars. The battle was nearly lost. Caesar's line was breaking. He grabbed a shield, jumped into the front line, and rallied his soldiers personally. "Are you going to let them hand me over to these boys?" he shouted. His soldiers, ashamed, fought desperately. They won, but barely. Perhaps 30,000 died, the highest casualties of any battle in the Civil War. Even Caesar later admitted this was the first time he feared for his life, not just his victory. Gnaeus Pompey was hunted down and killed. Sextus Pompey escaped and would later cause trouble. But the Civil War was essentially over. Caesar had defeated every enemy. He controlled the entire Roman world, from Spain to Syria, from Gaul to Africa. No Roman had ever held such power. He returned to Rome in October 45 BC. He was 55 years old. He had been fighting for 16 years, 9 in Gaul, 7 in civil wars. He was wealthy, victorious, and utterly dominant. The Republic was dead in all but name. The question was, what would Caesar do now? In the final months of his life, Caesar transformed Rome. He ruled as dictator, not a tyrant but a constitutional office, though he held it perpetually rather than the traditional 6-month limit. He accumulated offices: consul, tribune, with tribunician, bors, pontifex maximus, imperator. He was granted the title Father of the Fatherland. His statues appeared throughout Rome. His image was put on coins, a break with tradition, as only dead Romans had appeared on Roman coins. Caesar's reforms were extensive and often beneficial. He reformed the calendar, creating the Julian calendar, which with minor changes we still use. The old Roman calendar had only 355 days and required frequent adjustments. Caesar added days, creating a 365-day year with an extra day every 4 years. The month of his birth, Quintilis, was renamed Julius, July. He reformed the courts, improving efficiency and reducing corruption. He passed debt relief legislation to help the poor and middle class, crushed by civil war debts. He limited the terms of provincial governors to reduce extortion. He started massive public works, a new forum, libraries, temples, providing employment. He settled his veteran soldiers, founding colonies throughout the empire. He extended Roman citizenship to people in Gaul and Spain, expanding who could be Roman. He reformed the Senate, increasing its size from 600 to 900 and adding provincials, people from outside Italy, making it more representative, but also diluting the old aristocracy's power. But other acts seemed tyrannical. He appointed magistrates himself rather than letting them be elected. Elections became formalities. He publicly humiliated senators who opposed him. When tribunes arrested a man who put a crown on Caesar's statue, Caesar had the tribunes removed from office, violating the sacred inviolability of tribunes. He accepted divine honors, temples, statues, and even hints he might be declared a god in his lifetime, unprecedented for a living Roman. Most troubling, Caesar planned to make himself king, not officially. King was the most hated word in Rome, banned since the expulsion of the last king Tarquin the Proud in 509 BC. But Caesar would be king in all but name. There were rumors he planned to move the capital to Alexandria or Troy, that he would marry Cleopatra, who had come to Rome with their son Caesarion, that he wanted to be king in the eastern provinces where monarchy was normal. At the festival of Lupercalia on February 15, 44 BC, Mark Antony publicly offered Caesar a crown. Caesar refused it twice, and the crowd cheered. But the incident disturbed people. Was Caesar testing public reaction? Would he eventually accept? Meanwhile, Caesar planned a massive military campaign against Parthia to avenge Crassus's defeat and conquer the east. He would leave Rome on March 18, 44 BC. Once he left with his armies, he would be untouchable for years. A conspiracy formed, led by Gaius Cassius Longinus and Marcus Junius Brutus. About 60 senators secretly agreed. Caesar had to die before he left Rome. They called themselves the Liberators. They believed they were saving the Republic. They were wrong, but they didn't know that yet. The conspiracy to kill Caesar began with Gaius Cassius Longinus. Cassius was a talented general who had served under Crassus and survived the disaster at Carrhae. He had fought against Caesar in the civil war under Pompey, surrendered after Pharsalus, and been pardoned by Caesar. Caesar even appointed him praetor, a significant office. But Cassius hated Caesar. He believed Caesar had destroyed the Republic and made himself a tyrant. Cassius recruited carefully. He needed enough conspirators to overwhelm Caesar's bodyguards and to share the responsibility and the glory of tyrannicide. But he also needed secrecy. One informer could doom them all. He focused on senators, particularly men with Republican ideals, men who had fought on Pompey's side and been pardoned, and men who felt insulted or overlooked by Caesar. The key recruit was Marcus Junius Brutus. Brutus was complex, a philosopher who believed in Stoic virtue, a politician who claimed descent from Lucius Junius Brutus, who had expelled Rome's last king in 509 BC, and Caesar's protege. Caesar had favored Brutus throughout the civil war. Some whispered Caesar was Brutus's biological father. Caesar had had an affair with Brutus's mother Servilia decades earlier, though the timeline makes paternity unlikely. Regardless, Caesar treated Brutus like a son. But Brutus was also a Republican idealist. He believed in the Republic's institutions and the Senate's authority. When he saw Caesar accumulating unprecedented power, accepting divine honors, and possibly planning to become king, Brutus was torn. Cassius exploited this conflict, leaving anonymous messages for Brutus. "Are you really Brutus? Your ancestor expelled the kings. Where is your republican virtue?" Brutus joined the conspiracy. His name gave it legitimacy. If even Brutus, Caesar's favorite, believed Caesar must die, surely the cause was just. The conspirators grew to about 60 senators. They included Decimus Brutus, a different Brutus, one of Caesar's most trusted generals, Trebonius, who had served under Caesar in Gaul, Tullius Cimber, and many others. Most were pardoned Pompeians, or men who felt Caesar had slighted them. Only a few, like Brutus, seemed to have been motivated primarily by Republican ideology. Most had personal grievances wrapped in noble rhetoric. They called themselves Liberatores, the Liberators. They planned to kill Caesar at a Senate meeting on the Ides of March, March 15th, 44 BC. The Senate would meet at the theater of Pompeii because Caesar's new Senate house wasn't finished. Ironically, Caesar would die at the foot of Pompeii's statue. They couldn't let Caesar leave Rome for his Parthian campaign on March 18th. Once he left with his armies, he'd be surrounded by loyal legions. They had to act now, but they faced problems. Caesar had dismissed his personal bodyguard of Spanish cavalry, either from arrogance or because he wanted to show he trusted the Senate. But Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal lieutenant and co-consul, would be at the meeting. Antony was a capable soldier who would fight to defend Caesar. They assigned Trebonius to distract Antony outside the Senate chamber. The night before the assassination, Caesar attended a dinner party. The conversation turned to the best kind of death. Caesar said, a sudden death. He would get his wish. The morning of March 15th, 44 BC, began with omens, or what Romans would later interpret as omens. Caesar's wife, Calpurnia, woke from nightmares. She dreamed she held Caesar's bleeding body. She begged him not to go to the Senate. A soothsayer had warned him weeks earlier, beware the Ides of March. Caesar had laughed it off, but this morning he hesitated. Perhaps he would send word he was ill. But Decimus Brutus, one of the conspirators, but also one of Caesar's most trusted friends, arrived and persuaded him. Decimus mocked Calpurnia's fears. He told Caesar the Senate was about to offer him the title of king for territories outside Italy. If Caesar didn't come, the senators would be insulted. Caesar, ego-stroked and reassured, decided to go. He walked through Rome toward the theater of Pompeii. Someone tried to hand him a note warning of the conspiracy, but Caesar didn't read it. He was surrounded by petitioners. When he entered the theater, he saw the soothsayer who had warned him. "The Ides of March have come," Caesar said, mocking. "Aye, Caesar," the soothsayer replied, "but not gone." Caesar took his seat. Trebonius intercepted Mark Antony outside, engaging him in conversation, getting him out of the way. The conspirators gathered around Caesar, pretending to petition him. Tullius Cimber approached, begging for his brother's recall from exile. Caesar refused. Cimber grabbed Caesar's toga and pulled it from his shoulder. The signal. Casca struck first, stabbing at Caesar's neck. The wound wasn't deep. Casca's hand shook. Caesar grabbed Casca's arm and stabbed him with his stylus, writing implement. Caesar fought back. But then the other conspirators closed in. Daggers flashed. Caesar was struck again and again. Ancient sources say Caesar fought at first, struggling and shouting. But when he saw Marcus Brutus among the attackers, he stopped resisting. According to Suetonius, he said in Greek, "Kai su, teknon." You too, child. Shakespeare later changed this to the Latin, et tu, brute. He pulled his toga over his head, so he wouldn't see his killers, and so his body would be covered when he fell, and collapsed at the base of Pompey's statue. 23 stab wounds. Only 1 or 2 were fatal. The conspiracy's violence was excessive, almost ritual. 60 conspirators, but only about 23 actually struck. Each wanted blood on their hands, sharing the deed and the responsibility. The Senate erupted in chaos. Senators fled. The conspirators stood over Caesar's body, bloody daggers in hand, shouting liberty. They expected the Roman people to celebrate, to thank them for killing the tyrant. Brutus tried to address the fleeing senators, to explain they'd saved the Republic. But no one stayed to listen. Mark Antony, learning what happened, fled in disguise. He feared he'd be killed next. Other Caesarians went into hiding. The conspirators, confused and uncertain, fortified themselves on the Capitoline Hill. They had killed the most powerful man in the world. Now what? Caesar's body lay in the Senate for hours. Finally, 3 slaves carried it home on a litter. One arm hung down, trailing blood through the streets. The people watched in shock and growing anger. The conspirators had killed Caesar, but they'd done nothing else. They had no plan beyond the murder. They hadn't arrested Caesar's lieutenants. They hadn't seized the treasury or the military camps. They'd killed the king, but left the kingdom intact. It was a catastrophic failure of planning. For 3 days, Rome was paralyzed. The conspirators held the Capitoline Hill, declaring that they'd saved the Republic. Caesar's supporters hid or fled. The urban poor, Caesar's base, seethed with rage. The legions camped outside Rome, waited to see what would happen. Mark Antony emerged as the key player. As consul and Caesar's closest ally, he had authority. But he also had to be careful. 60 senators with bloody daggers had just killed Caesar. Antony was a survivor. He negotiated. On March 17th, 2 days after the assassination, the Senate met. The conspirators came down from the Capitoline, and Brutus addressed the Senate, explaining that Caesar had been a tyrant and his death was justified tyrannicide. But then came the dilemma. If Caesar had been a tyrant, then all his acts were invalid. That meant all appointments, all legislation, all honors were void. The Senate would have to undo everything Caesar had done. But that was impossible. Hundreds of senators held office because Caesar appointed them. Provinces were governed by Caesar's appointees. Soldiers expected land grants Caesar had promised. Colonies Caesar had founded would be illegal. Undoing Caesar's acts would create chaos. Cicero, the Republic's greatest living orator and a conservative who hated Caesar but hadn't joined the conspiracy, proposed a compromise. The Senate would grant amnesty to the conspirators, meaning they wouldn't be prosecuted for murder, but would also ratify all of Caesar's acts. It was logically absurd. You can't say Caesar was a tyrant, but his acts were legitimate. But it was politically necessary. The Senate voted for the compromise. The conspirators thought they'd won. Caesar was dead, and they were free. But Antony had another move. Caesar's will was read publicly. Caesar left his gardens to the Roman people as a public park. He left 300 sesterces to every Roman citizen, a significant sum, several months' wages for a laborer. The people, already angry at Caesar's murder, were now furious. He'd given them money and land even in death, while the liberators had only killed their benefactor. Then came Caesar's funeral. Antony gave the funeral oration. This moment was immortalized and fictionalized by Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. "Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears." Shakespeare's version is invention, but the essence is right. Antony praised Caesar, listed his accomplishments, displayed his will's generosity, and subtly, then not so subtly, questioned the assassin's motives. He displayed Caesar's blood-stained toga, showing the holes where 23 daggers had struck. The crowd went mad. Rioting erupted. The mob hunted for the conspirators. They found the poet Helvius Cinna, and thinking he was the conspirator, Cornelius Cinna, tore him apart in the street. Wrong man. But they were too enraged to care. They built a pyre in the Forum and cremated Caesar's body in a spontaneous, chaotic ritual. They took flaming brands from the pyre and ran to the conspirators' houses, trying to burn them down. The liberators fled Rome. Brutus and Cassius left Italy, heading to the eastern provinces to raise armies. Decimus Brutus fled north. Within a month of the assassination, the conspirators had lost Rome. Their liberation had lasted 4 days. Caesar's death didn't restore the Republic. It plunged Rome into another civil war. 3 men emerged to fight for control: Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal lieutenant; Marcus Lepidus, Caesar's master of a horse; and Octavian. Octavian, originally Gaius Octavius, was Caesar's 18-year-old grandnephew, and according to Caesar's will, his adopted son and heir. He was sickly, young, and inexperienced. No one took him seriously at first. But Octavian had 3 advantages: Caesar's name. He now called himself Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus. Caesar's money, inherited from the estate. And Caesar's veterans, who loved Caesar and transferred that loyalty to his heir. Octavian proved brilliantly ruthless. Over the next 15 years, he would outmaneuver every rival and establish himself as Rome's first emperor. Initially, Antony and Octavian were enemies. Cicero, desperate to save the Republic, allied with Octavian against Antony, thinking he could control the young man. Cicero gave 14 speeches, the Philippics, attacking Antony as a tyrant and praising Octavian. Cicero famously said of Octavian, "The young man should be praised, honored, and disposed of." He would regret that last part. In 43 BC, Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus reconciled and formed the Second Triumvirate, an official 3-man dictatorship granted by law. Their first act was the proscriptions, mimicking Sulla's purges 50 years earlier. They posted lists of enemies to be killed. Anyone could kill a proscribed person and claim a reward. Perhaps 300 senators and 2,000 equestrians, wealthy Romans, were murdered. Among the dead was Cicero. On December 7th, 43 BC, soldiers caught him fleeing Italy. Cicero, 63 years old, stuck his head out of his litter and told the soldiers to do their duty. They beheaded him and cut off his hands, which had written the Philippics. Antony's wife Fulvia reportedly took Cicero's head, pulled out the tongue, and stabbed it with hairpins, revenge for his eloquent attacks on her husband. The Triumvirate then turned east to confront Brutus and Cassius, who had raised armies in Macedonia and Syria. At Philippi in northern Greece in October 42 BC, 2 battles sealed the conspirators' fate. Cassius, thinking his army was defeated, committed suicide. 3 weeks later, Brutus's army was crushed. Brutus ran himself through with his sword, reportedly saying, "Wretched virtue, you were only a word, but I treated you as real." The liberators were dead. Every major conspirator was killed or forced to commit suicide. Caesar was avenged, but the republic they'd tried to save was dead too. The triumvirs divided the empire. Antony took the east and Egypt, where he fell in love with Cleopatra, Caesar's former lover. Octavian took the west. Lepidus got Africa but was soon sidelined. The inevitable showdown came between Antony and Octavian. At the Battle of Actium in 31 BC, Octavian's fleet defeated Antony and Cleopatra. They fled to Egypt. A year later, as Octavian's armies approached Alexandria, Antony committed suicide by falling on his sword. Cleopatra, refusing to be paraded in Octavian's triumph, killed herself, traditionally with an asp, poisonous snake. Though historians debate this, Octavian had Caesarion, Caesar and Cleopatra's son, murdered, eliminating any rival claim to Caesar's legacy. By 30 BC, Octavian stood alone. In 27 BC, the Senate granted him the title Augustus and voted him effectively unlimited power. He claimed to have restored the Republic, but it was fiction. He was Rome's first emperor in all but name. The Roman Empire was born from the Republic's corpse. Soft reflective music returns. Caesar's story didn't end at the theater of Pompey. His influence echoes across 2 millennia. Let us count the ways he changed the world. Political legacy. Caesar destroyed the Roman Republic, but created the Roman Empire. The Principate, ruled by emperors, would last 500 years in the West, 1,500 years in Byzantium. Every Roman emperor after Augustus claimed descent or connection to Caesar. Caesar became synonymous with emperor, Kaiser in German, Tsar in Russian. The title itself became power's ultimate symbol. Military legacy. Caesar wrote the book on military campaign, literally. His Commentarii de Bello Gallico, commentaries on the Gallic War, became a military textbook studied for centuries. His tactics, rapid marching, engineering, adapting to circumstances, inspiring personal leadership, influenced commanders from Napoleon to modern generals. His campaigns in Gaul, Britain, and Germany brought those regions permanently into Western civilization's sphere. Calendar legacy. We live in Caesar's calendar. The Julian calendar, with its 365-day year and leap years, was used until the Gregorian calendar, a minor modification. In 1582, July is named for Julius Caesar. The calendar reform was perhaps his most lasting practical achievement, more enduring than his conquests. Literary legacy. Caesar was among Rome's greatest writers. His prose was praised by Cicero, the Republic's greatest orator, for its clarity, elegance, and force. The commentaries remain readable today, teaching Latin students and historians alike. His reports shaped how Romans understood their empire and how we understand Roman imperialism. Cultural legacy. Shakespeare's Julius Caesar immortalized him in English literature. The assassination scene, Antony's funeral oration, friends, Romans, countrymen, and Brutus's dilemma have shaped how Western culture understands political assassination, ambition, and the conflict between personal loyalty and civic duty. Caesar became the archetype of the ambitious man undone by his own success. Constitutional legacy. Caesar's career posed questions that still haunt democracies. When does a leader become a tyrant? Is assassination of tyrants justified? Can republics handle successful generals? Should military heroes be allowed into politics? Is dictatorship justified in emergencies? These questions, still debated today, all trace back to Caesar's rise and fall. The paradox. Caesar claimed to defend the Republic while destroying it. His enemies claimed to save the Republic by murdering him, but their act ensured the Republic's death. Everyone claimed Republican virtue while pursuing personal power. The hypocrisy was total and mutual. Was Caesar a tyrant who deserved death? By Roman law and tradition? Perhaps yes. He'd crossed the Rubicon illegally, waged civil war, and accumulated dictatorial power. But was assassination the answer? It demonstrably wasn't. Rome got 15 more years of civil war and then permanent dictatorship under Augustus. Were the conspirators heroes or villains? They were both, and neither. Some, like Brutus, genuinely believed in republican ideals. Others, like Cassius, had personal grievances. Most were some mix of principle and resentment. They were sincere, mistaken, and catastrophically ineffective. The tragedy. Caesar's fall was Greek tragedy on a Roman stage. A man of extraordinary talent destroyed by his own ambition. Conspirators motivated by noble ideals committing murder that destroyed what they loved. A republic that couldn't adapt to empire, tearing itself apart rather than evolve. Everyone lost. Caesar, the conspirators, the republic, the Roman people. Only Caesar's memory won, turning him into a god and a cautionary tale. Closing meditation. Music fades to gentle, melancholic strings. The blood has dried in the theater of Pompeii. The Roman Forum is silent. Its marble monuments crumbled into museums and tourist sites. The Republic is 2,000 years dead. Caesar is mythology. But the questions remain. When does leadership become tyranny? When does reform become revolution? When does ambition serve the state? And when does it devour it? These questions haunted Rome. They haunt us still. Caesar was brilliant, charismatic, ruthless, and ultimately tragic. He conquered nations but couldn't navigate the Senate. He won every battle but lost his life to friends with daggers. He claimed to serve Rome, but made it serve him. He was a genius without wisdom, a conqueror without limits, a man who could master everyone except himself. As you drift to sleep, remember Caesar's lesson. Power corrupts, but powerlessness frustrates. Ambition builds, but ambition destroys. Victory in war doesn't guarantee victory in peace. And sometimes the greatest threat to a republic isn't external enemies, but internal success. Rest now. The Ides of March have come and gone. The tyrant is dead, the republic has fallen, and the empire rises. History turns, and we watch from safety, learning from their mistakes while repeating our own. Good night, and beware the Ides of March.